So we got in the dark late last night and joined in on the evening puja. There weren't many people there. Samye Ling's very quiet at the moment. They used to have Christmas retreats when Lama was well. But now Samye Ling is very quiet in the winter. I haven't been here for 9 years. The last time we were here was just after retreat. We'd finished our 4 years in Erin, and then we came here to wrap things up. Doesn't seem like 9 years ago. There's the thing. Time goes so quickly. We got this feeling like we're going to live forever. We keep making plans for the future. And I think 9 years has gone by. It really didn't seem like that long. Really, the past just goes in a flash. I mean, it was like yesterday I was a young child. You know, without a care in the world. And now suddenly, I'm an old man. And I've done a hell of a lot in my life. I was a musician, a computer consultant, a yoga teacher, and now a monk. Something we all need to understand is that we can't stop the wheels of time. I suppose the yogis of the past could stop the wheels of time. They could go forward and backwards. But for us ordinary beings, the clock just keeps ticking. At some time, then you just have to stop making plans and get on with it. But for us, it's a real difficulty, it's a real problem. We're always kind of trapped in our doubt, not really certain of which way to proceed. And for a lot of people, it's like that in the Dharma as well. We kind of never gain that certainty. That's essential in order to get on with our practice. We kind of believe in karma, cause and effect. We kind of believe in past and future lives. And likewise, we have some belief in something called liberation. But we never gain certainty. We always have doubts. And this is a huge obstacle. I mean, I'm not saying you have to have blind faith. What can I do if you don't believe in karma? If you don't believe in past and future lives? That's not my job to convince you. But what you need to know is time is running out. Like I say, the clock keeps ticking. And at some point, you've just got to get on with it. We have to do something. I mean, things aren't right the way they are. I know many teachers say you don't have to do anything. It's like wanting to do something is a fault or a problem. But ask yourself honestly, if you just remain the way you are, if nothing changes, then would it be all right? If there's nothing to work for, there's nothing to meditate on, then does that mean everything's okay the way it is? Because I suggest that if things aren't okay the way they are, if there are issues and there are problems, then likewise there may be some work to do. When I was young, I had a strong sense that things were not satisfactory. And many people tried to tell me that just thinking that alone is a mistake. As if we have to kind of ignore suffering. I think that's kind of foolish myself, to believe things are just fine the way they are. Maybe for an accomplished master, then everything is okay, because they perceive the world in a different way. But for ordinary beings like ourselves, then I don't see the point in just trying to kid yourself on. Just trying to pretend that everything's just fine the way it is. I mean, we see the suffering of others. There's war going on all over the world right now. People are suffering greatly. And for me, just to say, well, that's the will of God. That's the way it is. You just have to accept it, is kind of foolish. If there's something that can be done to improve things for oneself and others, then it wouldn't be right just to waste my time, right? Doing nothing and just pretending everything's okay. Well, if you listen to what the Buddha said, then the Buddha taught, first, no suffering. First, you have to understand that there is suffering. This is the first truth. What that means is things aren't okay the way they are. Things are not satisfactory. And then once you've recognized that things are not okay the way they are, then the next question that comes to mind is, well then, why is it that things aren't all right? What's the problem? What's the source of that? And this is the second truth. It's the truth of the origin. The truth of the origins of suffering. Well, in terms of what the Buddha taught, at least, then that source of suffering, the truth of suffering, is our mistaken conception. We suffer because we don't understand the way things are. We have a mistaken understanding. And that is based on clinging to me and mine. It's based on this notion that there is this self, this individual. I think some people find that hard to believe. They find it hard to accept, let's say. And what's more, they think the consequence of accepting the truth of no self is somehow a way of attacking them personally. But that's just a sign. It's a sign that we have strong clinging to self, this self that we wish to protect. But something you have to understand is that by realizing the truth of no self doesn't mean you're going to be obliterated. Somebody needs to remove you, get rid of you. That's not what it's all about. It's that we have a mistaken misconception. We have a mistaken way of identifying. We have what is called a mistaken self-identification. And because we have this mistaken identification, then we engage in mistaken conduct. Because in order to protect me and mine, then we engage in all kinds of negativity. So what is this third truth? Well, the third truth is the truth of cessation. That means, yes, there is suffering, and that suffering is based on a mistaken self-identification, this belief in a self that doesn't exist. But there is hope, because there is something called liberation. Now the question is, how do we become liberated? What is liberation? Well, it's difficult. As I said in a previous video, if I were to ask you, do you believe in awakening? Then I don't think that's an easy question to answer. It's not something we've seen, right? We've never experienced liberation. We've never met a Buddha. And so, aside from having blind faith, it's very difficult for us to accommodate the idea or the notion that there is something called liberation or transcendence from the mundane world. Anyway, whether you believe it or not, then what is this fourth truth? Well, that's the truth of the path. And the path is the cause for achieving enlightenment. So in the fourth truth, then there's two sets. The first is the theory of samsara. That's the theory of why we experience suffering. The truth of suffering and the cause of suffering. And then there's the second set, and that is the theory of nirvana. That's the truth of liberation or emancipation from suffering, and the cause or the path that leads to that emancipation. And within these four truths, the entire teaching of the Buddha is subsumed. So you may not believe in enlightenment and awakening. You may not be able to accept that. But the first question to ask is, do you believe in suffering? Have you experienced it? Not only that, is it okay? Do you accept your suffering? Are you happy to continue suffering? And if you accept the truth of suffering, and also you wish to go beyond that, then you've got work to do. You've got to discover the means for transcendence. And then exactly what transcendence is, then different people teach different paths. Some teach that transcendence from suffering is bliss. And so in their meditation, they work to achieve states of tranquility and bliss. Others teach that transcendence is the annihilation of all thought, is to achieve a state of perceptionless absorption in samadhi. Well, the question is, what did the Buddha teach? Well, the Buddha didn't give only one set of teachings. There are three turnings of the wheel of Dharma. And in the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, then the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Noble Path. It's the path of the Shravakyana, or the Hinayana. In the second turning of the wheel of the Dharma, the Buddha taught the truth of emptiness, and also the teachings on bodhicitta, or the path of the bodhisattva. And then the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, that is the teachings of the Vajrayana. That is the teachings of signlessness. Now the question for you is, what do you wish to achieve? And as far as I can see, then it's only based on understanding what your goal is, or your motivation, that then you will be able to apply yourself to the path of liberation. And it's not an easy question. Really, most of us don't know what our motivation is. We don't know what we intend to achieve, and we don't know how to get there either. But it's something that everyone needs to consider. That is, on the spiritual path. I mean, in worldly terms, then we also need a direction. We need aims and goals. I mean, being aimless is taught to be a very negative thing in the world and in the Dharma. But I understand. It's difficult. The truth is, we don't know what to believe. But as I said in the beginning, the problem is, time is running out. So I spent 4 years in the retreat on Aaron. And then that was 9 years ago. I came back to Samye Ling. And I spent 8 years in Nepal in retreat. And so far, 1 year in Canada looking after my parents. I have to say the feeling I'm left with is that time is running out. I'm not a young man anymore. I think I forget that often. I often forget that I'm not a young man. I mean, I'm nearly 60. Luckily, then my health has been quite good. I haven't had any severe challenges. That's not to say that these challenges aren't coming. One can never tell when one is going to fall ill with cancer or some other chronic disease. And the older you get, then the more your strength and your ability wane. I mean, physically and intellectually. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that you don't have time to wait and see what's going to happen. You don't have time to rest on your laurels. I think about 40 years ago, none of this was here. And it's not certain that in another 40 years, that there will still be something called Samye Ling. Before Akron Rinpoche passed from this world, he came into the retreat in Aaron, and he gave us one last message. He said he wanted us to make a commitment. He wanted us to make a promise that from now until achieving awakening, or until at least we achieve realization, then we should never waver from our practice and our commitment to the Dharma. At that time, his words had a very strong influence on me. And the next thing we heard was that Akron Rinpoche had died in Tibet under horrible circumstances. Somehow, then, however strongly we were influenced, and slowly that wears off. Our teachers have a profound influence on us because they encourage us not to waver from the path, to continue to apply ourselves to our practice, study and meditation. But once we're separated from our teachers, then their influence weakens and the influence of the world grows stronger. I met Katen Lama briefly in the dining room today, and he gave me some really quite wonderful advice. And it's advice that I needed to hear, because I felt like I'd become a bit complacent in my practice and in the Dharma. Katen Lama is somebody who has great faith in the Buddha Dharma. He has faith and he's inspired to practice. And he remains focused on bringing benefit in whatever way he can. I mean, he recognizes the difficulties I have living in Canada, in a place where there are so few practitioners. And for example, where I stay with my parents, where I'm basically the only monastic in the area. Like I say, many people think I'm sort of a weirdo or something like that. And it's something that Katen Lama has experienced himself. Even in places like London, places where they're more used to Buddhists, where they see more monks and nuns. But what he said to me was that, sure, we may be on our own and be seen to be eccentrics and somehow an anomaly in a society that is otherwise uninterested in spiritual practice. But we ourselves are inspired to the Dharma. We ourselves have faith in the path that was taught by the Buddha. And so that being the case, then we just have to do whatever we can in order to progress, and also try our best to use our opportunities wisely when they arise. Recognizing that it is quite difficult. It's quite difficult to make progress in the Dharma, to gain realization, to become learned. But regardless, whatever is the case, then we still have to do our best. We have to try our best to use our opportunities wisely, but also to create the circumstances by which we may advance in our practice. Because there's really no other choice. I couldn't believe the amount of stuff I had here. I really didn't think it was that much. My friend Bill and I, then we spent all day trying to sort out what could be kept, what had to be thrown away, what could be given away. I couldn't believe that it had been here for 9 years. I mean, it sounds almost impossible. I thought everything would just be rotten by now. But it was a bit like opening a time capsule. Opening a time capsule back to 9 years ago when I left retreat. And when I looked at my notes, the things I'd written at that time, I could see that my way of thinking was very different. I was far more focused on the practice then than I am now. I have to say it made me a little bit sad. But there's no way to go back and reclaim your time. Like I say, the hands of the clock just keep going. There's no way to stop the wheels of time. So whatever's the case, it's just like Katen Lama said, we just have to do what we can. Use the opportunities that are available to us and make whatever progress is possible in accordance with our circumstances and where we are. And also to plan for the future. Plan for opportunities to arise. And so I'm going to bear in mind what Katen Lama said. And it just might be that releasing videos on YouTube is not the most productive thing I can do to bring benefit on the spiritual path. I mean, I think there is possibly some benefit, but it could very well be the case that if I dedicated myself more to my studies and to my own practice, that in the long run, this will be something that is far more beneficial than me just talking to myself in my own YouTube echo chamber. Like I said in my previous video, then it seems like many of us are just trying to live out our mundane lives, but to do so with some attachment to our Dharma practice. To find a way to live out our mundane lives and do so with a Dharma flavor. I mean, for most people, most of the people I was in retreat with, then after coming out of retreat, and slowly, they just returned to the mundane world. Most of them lost their robes and have returned to worldly relationships. They've got jobs. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. You know, it could very well be that I'm the foolish one, and I should do the same. There are a few who have persisted, and then in the Samye Ling organization, they have some role or responsibility, and I think that's really wonderful. Obviously, right now, I'm not in a position to do that. I've got to look after my parents. But of course that situation isn't going to last forever. Well, I'm going to have to get off to Edinburgh soon. It's getting late. I packed up all my stuff. Bill's helping me out. He's putting it in the car. And then we aim to be in Edinburgh this evening. I remember the first time I came to Samye Ling, almost 20 years ago. At that time, the feeling I had was I never wanted to leave. It had a profound impact on my life. Somehow now, I don't have the same feeling. I see it to be a very special place. And I see it to be a place that has inspired many people to practice the Dharma. In fact, many people, when they pass from the world, have requested that they be interned in this stupa. They're cremated and their ashes are placed inside the stupa. Even people's pets, many cats and dogs. I guess in that way we feel like even after we've passed from this world, we can keep our connection with the Buddha Dharma. In a way, it's almost as if we recognize we're not capable of going beyond the world. And so the best we can do is to make the wish when we die to remain here and retain our connection with Samye Ling. Actually, I think many people involved with Samye Ling have great faith, and that's primarily because they have great faith in Akron Rinpoche and Lama Yeshe, the two brothers who founded this place. So I'm going to be honest with you, because I do believe in something called liberation. I do think it's possible. And also I have faith in the path that leads to liberation. So I do believe it's possible to transcend the world, and also that it is a beneficial and positive thing to wish for liberation. But maybe I'm just kidding myself on. I mean, there's nothing to say that once we die, that's it. It's all over. And so that's why we need to rely on these special lamas, our teachers, and also to rely on the teachings of the past masters, on the teachings of the Buddha. It requires faith. We have no empirical evidence, we have no proof that liberation exists. Something my teacher had often said is that whereas we have little regard for blind faith in the Buddha Dharma, in some ways it's absolutely essential when you're starting on the path. You need to believe in something. To start off with, you need to believe in something. And so that needs to be something positive. Well, Bill's coming now. I guess it's time to go. So thank you for listening to my ramblings, and I'll see you later.